So good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon to all of you who are joining us for this special webinar with PRS Legislative Research. I'm delighted to say we are joined by two distinguished experts from PRS, Chakshu Roy and M.R. Madhavan. Chakshu, Madhavan, welcome to the webinar. So, folks, those of you who've joined Marcellus webinars before, it's a familiar format. I'll introduce the two distinguished experts on the screen. They'll then tell you about the budgetary process. The theme today is how exactly do our politicians and our policymakers, how do they create the union budget? How much work goes into it? How does the lobbying ecosystem interplay with the budgetary ecosystem? When the MPs and MLAs come to vote on the budget, what is the information set available to them? Chakshu and Madhavan have had long experience as the folks at the helm of PRS Legislative Research. As you learn over the next hour or so, PRS Legislative Research is a very unique organization. They are basically providing research to MPs and MLAs across the land. And it's on the basis of this research that much of the parliamentary work is being done in our country. So very interesting group of people, really privileged that they have joined us. Let me just introduce Madhavan and Chakshu, and we'll hand over then to these two guys. Once they have spoken, we'll take your questions. Keep putting your questions in the Q&A box. We'll try to take as many questions as we can over the next hour or so. It's a real privilege that we'll get to ask these guys questions. So introductions. Madhavan co-founded PRS in 2005 and he's currently the president. Before PRS, Madhavan was someone like me. He used to work in the financial markets, whereas I've only figured out equities. Madhavan also figured out interest rates, currency markets, not just in Mumbai, but also in Singapore. He holds a PhD and an MBA from IIM Kolkata and a BTech from IIT Madras. He's been recognized as a distinguished alumnus both by IIT Madras and by IIM Kolkata. And 2019 was the year when Business Standard declared him to be the social entrepreneur of the year. Madhavan, privilege having you on Marcellus's webinar on how the budget is prepared. Let me go to Chakshu. Chakshu joined PRS in 2006, and he heads the legislative and civic engagement activities of PRS. Chakshu regularly briefs India's over 400 MPs and over 1,000 MLAs across the states, across the country, across political parties, not just on the budgets, but also on various legislative bills. In fact, much of the most interesting stuff that PRS does is on legislation, such as the new criminal law bill, which is underway, such as the law on privacy, which is currently underway. Chakshu frequently writes in newspapers. Those of you who read the Indian Express or the HT or the TOI would find Chakshu's columns there. He's an IVLP and Inc. fellow, and he holds a bachelor's degree in commerce and law from Delhi University. So without further ado, over to the experts at PRS about how the union budget is prepared by the people who run our country. Over to you, Madhavan.
Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks a lot for organizing this and inviting us for this. And thanks to everyone else who has joined us to listen to this topic, which may not be of the top priority for you, but I think it's fairly important as a citizen of India. So not maybe just for your business. I'll just share a screen. Yeah. Just checking, is the screen visible?
Yep, it works.
Yeah. So before I get into the budget, I'll add a couple of lines on what we do and why we do it. So if you think of the role of an MP, they deal with a wide range of subjects. They have to decide on very complex issues. Just to give you an example, over the last few months, the bills that have been considered and passed are the criminal law bills, which replaced your IPC, Evidence Act, CRPC. So to do that, somebody needs to understand what are the principles of criminal jurisdiction. How does criminal jurisdiction work? Then they looked and passed the telecom bill. They did the personal data protection bill, where you're looking at privacy issues. You're looking at, let's say, forest conservation bill. You're looking at things like National Dental Commission bill. I'm just giving you a few examples which were passed recently, just to give you a sense of the variety of issues that an MP looks at. And it's really impossible for any person to be an expert across these range of subjects. They also look at technical issues such as the union budget, the expenditure of ministries, etc. Now, certain well-matured democracies like the US have put in very strong systems to help their legislators. So the United States has a group called the Congressional Research Service, which provides support on all legislation and other issues. They have a different group called the Congressional Budget Office, which does projections of different budgetary uh, proposals, how that will affect, and that informs the legislators. They have provided research staff paid through the exchequer for every senator. So they have built all that. What do we have in India? Practically no support at all. So we set up PRS in 2005, saying that this is something that needs to be fixed. If we expect MPs to take decisions which in an informed way, and each of those decisions affect us as citizens, if we want them to do that, we should make sure they should have the information and the analysis. So that's what PRS does. Now, coming to the budget, which is the topic for today, much of what I'm going to talk about, the budget process, etc., is based on our learnings doing this since we set up in 2005. So 2006 budget onwards, we have been trying to help them, and we have learned along the way. So what is the budget timeline? As you can see, there are broadly three phases. The first phase happens within the ministry. When they do consultations with various set of people, they make their projections, all that happens by January. Then it comes to the parliament. It's presented to on the 1st Feb. It is presented in parliament when we all know what is being presented. Then immediately after that, there is a discussion on the general principles of the budget, what is doing in parliament. I am a caveat, I am talking about a normal year, not the budget which is going to be proposed day after tomorrow, because this is an interim budget and this is an election year. So this process will again happen in June, July, what I'm going to say, because that will be the main budget. So this is the main budget. After the general discussion, usually parliament takes a recess for a period, about 3 weeks, which is where the real work happens. I'm going to talk about that, where the expenditure budget of every department and ministry is looked at by various by the committees, and then it comes to the parliament and it gets passed. Now, it's important to note that parliament is the institution, not the government. It's parliament which decides what is your tax, how much can you be taxed, what are the changes, how much expenditure the government can spend up to the line item level, how much government can borrow. In theory, under the constitution, this is what parliament is expected to do. In practice, the way it works is, in a parliamentary system, if a budget is not passed, the government falls. So the budget will always be passed. This is very unlike, so many of us follow the US system, unlike the American system, where you can have the federal shutdown when the Congress does not pass the budget and the government doesn't have money. We can never have that. If that happens, the government goes. So you'll have either a different government, it's like a no confidence motion or dissolution of parliament. So a lot of things happens before the budget is passed. That's where the things happen. Now, this is a graph which shows the number of hours that the budget was discussed in Lok Sabha. And as you can see, there is a sharp fall after 92-93, which we have highlighted. And what happened then? An important structural system was built in. The standing committee system was established in 92-93, and budgets started being examined by them and not just discussed in the House. What happens in standing committees? Okay. I'll just explain what is a standing committee. So with respect to the budgets. So there are 24 standing committees of parliament, each of which has 31 members, 21 from Lok Sabha, 10 from Rajya Sabha. They are all party committees, roughly in proportion to the party strength in parliament, each committee will have. So BJP would have from the 21 Lok Sabha people, they're slightly more than 50%. So they will have something like 11 MPs or so, typically 11 or 12 MPs. Similarly, Congress will have about 10%. So they'll have 2 to 3. So that's the way the committees are formed. The committees do 3 important roles. They examine bills in front of parliament which are referred to them. Every bill is not referred to them, but whatever is referred to them, they look at them and come out with the recommendations. They examine the expenditure budget of ministries. They do this every time, every ministry. And they also look at certain specific topics that they pick up to look at. Now, as far as the budget is concerned, we looked at the 23-24 budget, which is the last year's budget. Out of the 102 departments, standing committees examined 97 out of them. And in fact, practically everything, the 5 they did not examine were the Office of the President, Office of the Vice President, the Lok Sabha budget, the Rajya Sabha budget, and the budget of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. All put together about 0.01% or 0.02% of the total budget. So effectively, they examined the entire expenditure budget. And they, as you can see, a lot of meetings, a lot of reports. They come out with the report which is presented in Parliament. Discussions happen. The recommendations of the report are important because they are later followed up and there is an action taken report. I'll just talk about that. Now, just to take an example of one of these committees, we just looked at the defense budget. What do the committees do? They call in senior government officials to come and testify before them to say what they want. They also call in certain cases, the stakeholders. So in case of defense, in 2020, the people who testified, and this is all in public domain, it's in the committee report. The testimony included by the then CDS, General Bipin Rawat, the 3 vice chiefs of the 3 services came and deposed. The defense secretary came and deposed. Of course, the services wanted more money. Defense secretary said, we can't have, we are not being given more. The finance ministry people also come and explain what they are doing. So the committee examines these people. As you can see in the graph, they sat for a total of 20 hours. They came out with a number of recommendations. One of the important findings that they did, in addition to what I have put up on the screen, is that committed expenditure of the defense ministry or the capital outlay was a large part of the capital expenditure. What this means is just what is committed expenditure. I'll just give an example. Let's say you're buying an aircraft carrier. You're not going to pay the money upfront for the whole amount. It'll be paid in installments over 5 years or 6 years. So if you've already started paying, effectively the next year's EMI is committed. So if you look at that, that was forming over 90% of the total. So that left very little leeway for fresh capital outlay. This came out in the committee report. So they come out with such important findings. And that's the only public space source where we have found such information. Committees also, in addition to calling in the witnesses, typically for the budgets, they call in the government witnesses. They also use other inputs. So what we do is to support the committees because they are again looking at complex issues. We prepare an analysis of each of the ministry's expenditure budget. We do this for the top 14-15 ministries, effectively covering 70% of the total budget. So all the bigger ministries, we do that. One of the examples was we had given an analysis of the education ministry, and these reports we send it to the respective committees, and we also send it to all the MPs before they discuss in Parliament. So this is an excerpt from page 13 of that committee report. And if you see, I've highlighted that. They used our report in their report to uh, uh, they cited us to actually make certain points. So the point here is to say that if you want to engage, there are open spaces. Committees use public inputs. We have no official position. All the position we have is we are Indian citizens. That's it. But if we are giving them useful information, they use that.
And Madhavan, if you don't mind my asking, just go to that table, right? That table is basically is what you guys had created.
Yeah.
And the committee cited that table.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And pulling that table together must have taken research effort
Of
on
course.
on your team's part. Okay.
Of course. Each of these takes a. So I have this. I'll just show you. We put together to send to MPs. This is all the reports put together of all the expenditure budget last year. It comes to 167 pages of all
Wow.
the ministries put together. So this is available on our website. So anybody can see. We have put it out in the public domain.
I mean, at a superficial level, people will say it's just table hai. But if I look at that table, it's an enormous amount of work to figure out where did the money spent by the Ministry of Education go. And you probably are the only people in the country who did the work to create that analysis of the expenditure of the Ministry of Education, so much so that the parliamentary committee is citing your work. Remarkable. Oh, carry on, Mario.
Thanks. So what happens? So as I said earlier, the committees give the report discussed in Parliament. Okay. Now, if the budget is not passed, the government falls. So the budget will be passed. So what's the point of all this? The point of this is the governments, because the standing committee reports, especially for the expenditure, I have rarely seen a dissent note. So it's a consensus across all parties, including the government party members. And this we have seen right through UPA and NDA. So it's not a party specific thing. So the government takes it seriously. The government minister, the finance minister, may move amendments based on the committee's recommendations. So it becomes a government amendment, and therefore the expenditure can change. And the committee also follows up because they make a number of recommendations. The government later gives them what action they have taken. So just again, this is a defense budget. If you see the action taken report, and we have taken an excerpt from their report, out of the 69 recommendations, the government accepted 56 completely. And we have gone through most of the action taken report. Typically, about 80 to 90% of all recommendations, in some cases even 100%, are accepted by the government. So the government takes this seriously. That's where the parliamentary system and the committee system adds value and comes in. Slight aside to the budget, I just wanted to give an example where somebody from the general public like us can make an intervention which is used. So the insolvency and bankruptcy code, which many of the people on this call may be familiar with, the bill came in. The bill had a very interesting provision. This is an excerpt from the original bill, clause 206. What it effectively said is that the insolvency professional who would do the resolution of a company would have to put up a performance bond, essentially a bank guarantee, equal to the size of the assets of a company. Okay. So if you have a company which is being resolved, which is, let's say, 20,000 crore assets, the IPA, which should insolvency professional will have to put a bank guarantee of 20,000 crore, which means basically the resolution doesn't happen because nobody can put it up. It also said that the insolvency professional agency to which this person is affiliated, every member of that will be jointly and severally responsible for any losses caused by the IP. So we pointed this out in our deposition to the parliamentary committee. This is an excerpt from what we told them. And we actually said that if this happens, you're effectively going to do small resolution, you will not do large resolutions. And the committee amended the bill. They came out with a new bill and they changed the provision to, if you see, of course, the numbering changes because some other clause earlier changed. So 205 is almost identical to clause 4, the last clause of 206. So they completely dropped the entire performance guarantee business. And so the point I want to make is, if one gives them useful inputs, they take it at value. And this again was a report. These parts were all party and everybody accepted. So it's not motivated by party side. Quickly, I just wanted to talk about the state budgets before I end. What we don't realize, especially given all the media attention on the union budget, which usually happens for a few weeks, is that state budgets are actually more important. So as you can see in this graph, the amount spent by states is actually more than, usually 50% more than the amount spent by the center. And there is very little focus on that. And even more importantly, what the state spends on are issues that directly affect us. It's issues like education, police, health. I mean, the center spends things on defense, which is important, but doesn't affect my day-to-day life. So we need to focus on this. And the point here is that the role of MLAs, who are expected to scrutinize this, similar to what MPs of Lok Sabha are expected to scrutinize the union budget, MLAs is also extremely important. Unfortunately, it's not working as well in the states. So states, this is the data for 2022 calendar year. On average, states meet for less than 25 days a year. A large part of this, which is the darker blue at the bottom, is during the budget session. Now, budgets are discussed in the House, but most states do not have a committee system like Parliament does. So there is no detailed scrutiny off camera in the committees, which happens. We have tried over the last few years to increase our coverage of states. Now we analyze the budgets of every state, all 28 states. We brief the MLAs ahead of the discussion in the House, and we have seen that there is a lot of demand for that. There's a lot of appetite for that.
And Madhavan, like the union, is there a time gap between the FM at the state standing?
No.
There is no time gap.
So in states, let us say today is Tuesday. If there's a budget presented today, typically the discussion will be, if not tomorrow, day after tomorrow.
Okay. So the time you have is very limited.
We have tonight.
Right. Wow.
And we start briefing late tonight. Because the budget is in the afternoon, we get the document by 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. We do our analysis. So we have enough prior preparation so that we can actually do an analysis and cross-check the numbers. And it's very important for us to get this right, because we have taken the onus that what we are giving in, if they're using in the House, it affects a lot of people. So it affects the public. So it's our responsibility to be sure that we are not doing an error in our analysis. So we typically finish that in about 4 hours. For the northern states, we also translate it into Hindi. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to translate and check, because Hindi most of us can read. But if it's some other language, we don't even know whether translation is accurate. So currently our translation is only to Hindi. Right. Ideally, it should be to Tamil, Oriya, Telugu, so that the MLAs can get it. We have not yet reached that. So much more work is needed there. That's what I wanted to say. And I'll just end here so that we have time for Q&A. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for listening to me. These are our contact details on the screen. My email is Madhavan, which is my first name, at prsindia.org. And we are there. We do tweet, we tweet only specific to what's happening in Parliament and states. We won't spam. And we have put up videos on YouTube, 3-minute videos explaining bills. So, and all our analysis, all our work, which we do, is available in the public domain. It's on our website, prsindia.org. I'll just stop here. Thanks.
Thanks, Madhavan. Just leave that slide there, Madhavan. It's very useful for us to have your contact details. I'll just abuse my position as a host to ask you a couple of questions, which I've been very curious about for a long time. Folks, please put your questions in the Q&A box. Try to get as many of them in by 7 p.m. So we keep hearing about this new criminal law bill, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, that's going through Parliament. It's still a bill. I think it's not become an act. And recently I read about the truckers going on strike because they believed that their lives would become more difficult. So I'd gone to the PRS website and I was reading up on how you guys have analyzed the criminal law reforms. How the Indian Penal Code is going to make way, the Code of Criminal Procedure is going to make way. And as I was reading through that, I realized it's sort of not only relevant analysis for MPs and MLAs, but even for someone like me who pretends to know what's going on in the country, it's extremely well written, incisive analysis of pretty complex legislation, right? I mean, this Nyaya Samhita, this will replace three big codes: the Indian Penal Code 1860, the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, and the Indian Evidence Act. How do you guys actually do this sort of work? I mean, this is incredibly hard work, detailed work. It needs top quality legal brains, analytical powers. How are you guys staffed to provide this sort of research analysis? I'm getting it free of charge as a member of the public, but I couldn't help wondering what's the sort of level of team that you employ to do research of this caliber?
Thanks. So we have a team where there is, I mean, it's a mixture of people with background in all sorts of things. So economics, journalism, law, engineering. So it's a mixed team in that sense with educational background. When we do a research on any bill, we rely a lot on external expertise. And we have been fortunate that most people, because of the type of work we do, they see this as a public good and are quite generous with their time. So just to get to this set of bills, there are actually three bills. BNS, which replaces the IPC, the BNSS, Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Samhita, which replaces the CRPC, and this Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, which will be replacing the Evidence Act. Fairly complex issues, a lot of jurisprudence issues. So we spoke to a number of people. This included lawyers, obviously, and both from defense lawyers, public prosecutors. We talked to retired Supreme Court, High Court judges. We spoke to academics. We spoke to cops who will be doing it. We even spoke to a jailer because the person is going to be implementing a bunch of these things. So each of these bills, typically we speak to a number of people and we take notes, but we don't cite them. We keep so that they can speak to us freely. What they tell us or leads to us, because they may not be fully correct, we will verify them. We will look for sources. So whenever we write our brief, everything we say as a citation to something that you would hopefully see as a credible source. So that's what. So this set of bill itself took us about 2 months to do the analysis. And interestingly, okay, we did the analysis. We sent the analysis to the standing committee, which was examining it. And they have not cited us, but we can see that some of the things we pointed out have found their way in their thinking, a couple of things at least. But then the bill came to Parliament. The ministry took a lot of the committee's recommendations in, and instead of moving amendments to the bill, which is what they can do, they withdrew the bill and came out with a fresh set of bills. So now we had just a couple of days because we're going to take it up. So in 2 days, we produced, since we had done the work before, we produced 3 new briefs in those 2 days and were able to send it in time to the MPs so that they can use it. Many of them use them in their interventions in Parliament.
So you basically email the briefing to the MPs. Do you also sort of sit down one-on-one or Zoom calls and brief them?
Yeah. So not Zoom calls too much. A number of them we do one-on-ones because MPs want that. on many of these, we also do. I mean, this one, of course, happened in the sense the final bill came and went so fast that we could not do one of the things we usually do, which is when Parliament is in session. We have a meeting every Thursday, which is open to any MP and only to MPs. Wow. So it's in that sense, it's a closed door in the sense you have to win an election to Lok Sabha or to Rajya Sabha or be nominated to be in the room. But if you have done that, anyone can be in the room. The reason is so that we can actually follow Chatham House rules and they can speak freely, not us. Okay. Just to give an old story, this was years ago, more than 10 years ago, where one of the left party MPs was vigorously arguing for labor reforms, which if it had come to the papers would have got that person in trouble. But so the closed door thing helps people discuss things open freely. That's our purpose. And typically about 15-20 MPs attend these sessions. We also, MPs call us one-on-one briefings. Chakshu actually goes for many of them. And Chakshu may want to add to this about some of these things. Chakshu?
I think the biggest revelation for me while interacting with members of parliament is as to how hardworking they are, and which is contrary to the public image very often associated with MPs and MLAs. And while they come from extremely different backgrounds, their uptake on issues, because their connect to the ground is so strong, that their uptake on issues is very quick. So if you're talking budgets with them or if you're talking policy with them, they can take something from 36,000 feet and really distill it to the ground to say as to what is it is going to mean for a citizen, the impact of these numbers. So those are two things that really stand out. I think one thing that I also like to mention is that the work that we do, the reason so many members of parliament and MLAs reach out to us is because our research is analytical, it is non-partisan. It does not take a side, it does not support, it does not criticize. So when we produce that research, whichever MP asks for it, they'll get the same document. They'll get the same briefing. So a member of the PRS staff will either go to their house or meet them in parliament or meet them at the Constitution Club, and they'll brief them. But the document that they'll get will be exactly the same, irrespective of who's asking. So over the years, this has built a lot of trust, and PRS is what many members of parliament refer to as the first port of call. So if a political party asks their member to participate on a budgetary debate or a legislative debate, for most of the serious members of parliament, after they get that phone call from their party or after they get that instruction from the party, it is likely that they will reach out to PRS and say, has PRS done any analysis which is available on that subject?
Brilliant stuff. Now, lots of our clients are asking the same questions. So Srikanth, Jaykumar, Ravi Kiran, several people asking the same question, which is, how do you guys pay for all this? How do you get paid? What's the business model in Bombay jargon?
Yeah, very simple answer. There isn't one. Okay, so I'll just explain that. So I'll just tell you the philosophy and come to how we work. Obviously, it costs. I mean, we need good people. I mean, people costs. We run a number of programs, program costs. So there is an expenditure and that needs to be funded. Now, whatever, all our research, if we go back to the first principle of why we set up PRS and why we are doing what we are doing, is that citizens of India should have laws that are well thought through, that have got the research going into them. Budgets which are passed are well examined. All policies are well thought through. And our representatives who are constitutionally mandated to do this job are the MPs. For us, therefore, MPs and MLAs are the people who help citizens' life be better. So final target in that sense is the citizen. Now to do this, we need to make this available to every MP and every MLA, regardless of whether they pay us or not. So if I make a fee-based model An MP who is not paying will not use, and that doesn't serve the final purpose. A second purpose is we need citizens to know what Parliament is doing. We need citizens to know what these bills are about, how the bills will affect that. And again, if you put it behind a paywall, we are just reaching a certain small set of citizens and not everyone else. So in a classic economic jargon, a good law is the classic public good, right? Well-made law. So what we are doing is actually helping up what PRS does as a public. So it needs to be paid by the public. Okay, public at large. Now, other countries like the US, the UK, they are within the US, the Congressional Research Service, what I talked about, it sits within the Library of Congress, which is a part of the legislature. So they have a budgetary allocation to fund them. Similarly, in the UK, House of Commons research is paid for by the House of Commons budget. So again, essentially the taxpayer money is funding them directly. In India, the parliament doesn't do that. And of course, we also know that if the government funds an institution, how independent it could be of the government of the day is always a question, much more of a question in the US than in India than in the US. So our funding is entirely Indian donors, Indian philanthropists. So we raise money 100% funded by Indians who are giving us donations. And this is largely individual donations, to some extent a couple of foundations, but it's more of individual, high net worth individuals giving us funding.
So folks, you have the answer there. Lots of you asked this question as to how is PRS funded. Madhavan is making it clear this is basically donations from Indian citizens. And if you guys want to donate, Madhavan's email address is there. Now that then begs the question, Madhavan, won't lobbyists then effectively give you heavy donations and try to then influence you so that you influence the lawmakers in the land?
Yeah. So we have put in certain systems in place to prevent that. Okay. I tell you, one, no donor gets to know what we are working on now. We don't reach out to them for inputs. Two, we passed a board resolution about 10 years ago saying that anybody who's donating to us will not get a board seat. So it's a disqualifier. Unlike other non-profits where donors are on the board, we have a completely independent and a very strong board. I mean, our chairperson is Mr. Ramadurai, who used to head TCS. So we have people of that caliber. The whole board is on the website, so I won't talk about it. But we have a very independent-minded board. Third, we will not do any meeting. We will not arrange a meeting of any funder with any legislator. So what do funders get from us? Nothing directly. They just get, let us say, a better India or a better made law, which is a public good for everyone. It is like if you are donating to, let us say, some organization which is feeding poor children. What do you get directly in exchange? Nothing. You're just making sure this country is better. So that's what donors are doing.
Right. Fantastic. Girish Wardadkar asks a specific question. He's asking, are you a Section 8 company?
Yes.
Okay, you're a Section 8 company. Fantastic. So Girish, I think you have your answer there. SS is asking,
and we do not have FCRA.
You don't have FCRA. So foreign foundations can't come in?
No, because what we are doing is dealing with Indian Parliament. And our previous chairperson, who was Mr. Wagul, said that if India's parliament has to work better, Indians should pay for it. And if Indians are not willing to pay for it, we'll shut down. But we should make sure that India's parliament is funded by Indians.
That's kudos to Mr. Wagul for clarity of thought. So Girish, yes, this is a Section 8 company. It's a not-for-profit. It cannot be funded by foreigners. It needs donations from Indians to keep it going. So now we come to role of PRS when a policy is in gestation for a long period of time, right? It's powerful, it's important. So I guess GST would have been the mother of such policies. It was probably in the works for a decade or more. How do you guys get engaged in something which is as all-encompassing as GST, right? And is in the works for a decade or more? Does it end up eating up an inordinate amount of your time? Because if money is coming through donations and there's only so many hours in the day, How do you engage with the big complicated policies which sort of make or break India?
So, I'll just break up the policy process into two parts. One, when it's in the government and government is making it. Second, when it's with parliament. So we have taken a very conscious call that we do not work with the government of the executive. We are here to strengthen parliament. And there's a good reason for that. Let us say, if we were involved in helping the ministry draft a bill, it's an important thing. But then we cannot write an independent evaluation of that bill and give that to, because we are authors. So we decided to be critics rather than authors. Okay, to put it in a different way. So let's say GST, the way it worked is the first bill came in, I think, 2012, 13, sometime like that. Okay. We wrote a brief on that. We sent it to the MPs. It went to the standing committee. We sent our note to the standing committee. That bill again got it lapsed when the 14 election happened. A new bill was brought in by this government, which was slightly similar but with some important changes. This was the GST Constitution Amendment Bill. Again, there were those issues. We pointed out some of the issues, including the fact that there would be, they had that interstate movement will carry 1%, so how that would cascade in taxes. We pointed out some of those issues. It went to a select committee of parliament. In fact, before the GST bill was discussed in parliament, the largest parties, all of them had long briefings with us. And then the bill was passed after that. So then the four CGST, SGST, IGST, UTGST bills came out. We did a series of, we of course wrote briefs on them and informed MPs. We also were invited, we spoke and asked them, and we were invited by a number of states. So state speaker or the legislative secretary, the person of the secretary of the Legislative Assembly, who is the top official, or the speaker of the assembly would invite us, and we would do a briefing for the MLAs of the state. I mean, I still remember, I didn't go for that, Chakshu and then for that, so Chakshu can maybe talk about this. The briefing we did in Lucknow on the GST for the UP Assembly.
So it's interesting. The law for it to become operational also had to be approved by the state legislatures, and a number of state legislatures then invited us that before they go ahead and vote on it within their chambers, they wanted to understand as to what the law was doing. So in UP, if some of you have visited Lucknow, you would notice that opposite the Vidhan Sabha is this big building that was constructed. It's almost in a Roman Gothic style. It can seat about 500 people.
Mm-hmm.
And UP is a big legislature, I think 400 MLAs, about 150 odd MLCs. And all of them came to this big building and sat,
Wow.
I think 2.5 hours as we patiently went through the provisions of the GST law. And what was even more surprising was that not only did the MLAs sit through, but the chief minister and his deputy chief ministers, who were supposed to be there only for the inauguration part of it, they actually sat down, moderated some of the session, and also asked questions to clarify as to what were the different nuances. The other thing that I want to point out is that in our work around budgets or legislation, timelines sometimes are very tight. So Madhavan mentioned that we worked on the iterations of the new criminal laws, and then some of that feedback was incorporated and it was brought before Parliament and was going to pass 2 days later. In state budgets, usually the cooling off period between budget presentation to budget discussion is 48 hours.
Right.
And sometimes that cooling off period is not there because if the government's in a hurry. So that puts a lot of pressure on us to not only be right, but also to make sure that that line that we have set for ourselves, that where we are non-partisan, we don't cross that line. So it's if you ever visit the PRS office during the January month or the February month, it's an interesting time. There are lots of stacks of papers all over the place. And till a few years ago, many of you are from Mumbai, till a few years ago, when we used to go to Maharashtra to the Vidhan Bhavan for the budget session, we used to get the budget papers in a suitcase. So you would see us dragging a suitcase out of the Vidhan Bhavan, taking it to the place that we were analyzing it, and then do the analysis. Hopefully things have become easier. But they've also become difficult in the sense that many of us are used to Excel and seeing budgets and numbers in Excel.
Yeah.
But that's not how state governments put out their budget. They will usually put out a PDF. And sometimes it will not be a PDF that you can copy paste from. It's a PDF which is a scan of a paper.
Wow.
And it can be in Hindi, it can be in Marathi, it can be in different languages also. So it's not fun being at PRS during budget times.
So lots of questions on funding. So Vimal Kumar Muthuramalingam asks, is there a minimum amount to donate? Madhavan, do you want to take that? Is there a minimum amount that one can donate, or is there any floor on your donations?
So typically our minimum donors have been of the 1 lakh range, simply because there is also, there is a transaction cost, as businesses, for each of these, because you have to process it, audit, income tax, all that.
Right.
So in a way, if you see some organizations which do a lot of retail and you look at their accounts, you'll find they are between 33 to 50% of the. So for every rupee they raise, they spend between 33 and 50 paisa to raise that. We spend about 2 paisa. And we would like to retain that model, because so that the money that comes in doesn't go into raising more money that comes in, but rather goes into the. So it's, and we have, the larger ones are of course big foundations like Mr. Premji's foundation and some people.
So 1 lakh is the minimum for transaction cost reasons. Vijay Gole is asking, are you CSR funding eligible?
Very small part of our work is CSR funding eligible. And because there is a question mark, we got a opinion done by AZB. They pointed out what could be CSR funded. And that's a very small part. So we are actually, for all practical purposes, we are not.
Okay, fantastic. You basically prefer donations from individuals and charitable foundations rather than CSR funding, because the CSR funding is only so much you can take.
Correct.
Got it. Now, Siddharth TC asks an interesting question. He's saying, has AI helped you in your research, in your translation, in your reviewing? Is that something that is an efficiency generator or an effectiveness generator for PRS?
Not yet in any significant manner, except in one place, which is we have a translator doing English to Hindi, and the translation is not good enough. So Google Translate, I'll ask you to test this out. I tested it a month ago. If you just ask a question, ask it to do, there are 2 schools of thought. It says do pathshala, it doesn't say. So that's what Google Translate still does. Okay. So the translator now puts our English stuff into Google Translate, gets the output. It gets about 70 to 80% right. And it therefore saves a lot of typing time, and then edits that to clean it up. So efficiency her productivity has gone up 3x. Fantastic. But that's the only place where we are using, what you could call AI. Right. We haven't figured out how to use it elsewhere.
Right. Ravi Kiran is asking, are you limiting your remit only to reviewing parliamentary bills, or do you cover the various regulators? I guess Ravi is alluding to the fact that regulators in India are becoming sort of hyperactive. So does PRS cover that, or does it focus just on parliamentary matters?
So we are not doing regulators. Well, I think we are also. I'll just explain that. So there are laws. There are acts of parliament, there are acts of state legislatures, which come through bills.
Right.
And we analyze bills for parliament. We analyze bills in state legislatures also. Of course, we are limited in state legislatures by the fact, and I have the data somewhere here, which in most states, most bills are passed the next day or within 2 days, and many the same day. So if a bill is introduced at 12 noon and passed at 1 o'clock, there is no way we can analyze it. Okay. So that's the problem with states. But we do to the extent some states are better off. Now, after a bill becomes an act, then there are rules and regulations that follow, which are also part of the law. So we have done a few rules and regulations, which are done by the ministry or could be by a regulator. We have not done as much as we ought to do, partly because of our bandwidth resource issues. But ideally, we should be doing more of those.
Sure. So Siddharth TC asked a very interesting question. He is saying that without the assistance of PRS, so he's saying, think of a world without PRS. How would an MP or an MLA ensure effective, legislative planning or budgetary planning?
So they have their own networks. So they reach out to their networks, they get the inputs. But what they would get in that case is something very often which is motivated by the ideology or the angle that those people want to do. What we do is we clean it off that to the extent possible.
Right.
And we have dedicated, for example, let's say criminal law bill, we spoke to about 20 people. None of them would be actually talking to 20 people and figuring that out.
Right. Right. So the Siddharth TC then follows up with another very interesting question. He's saying, how do you ensure that your personal biases don't affect your research, right?
Yeah.
For example, when say if it's a emotive subject, penal code, uniform civil code, how do you draw a line between your personal biases and the research that you give legislative?
Very good question. So we have 3 rounds of review. Okay. So first round, of course. So there is 1 or 2 in the criminal, because there are 3 bills and big ones. 3 people wrote together all the 3 bills. But so the analysts are writing the bill. The head of research and very often me, we also review the bill at the first round. Second round, the whole team sits together. There are about 15 people, and presumably 15 people don't have the same bias. Okay, unless Chakshu and I are biased in our hiring, which is unlikely. Okay, so and the team on every research note goes through line by line, every line we go through, and somebody will point out, hey, this is not clear, or this is not biased, or even why don't you, instead of writing this paragraph, put a table so that it's easier to see. So we go through a full review process. That's the second round. The third round is we have a lawyer who checks all our briefs. And after that, it then goes out to the world. So hopefully in this, so the way I would say is, if somebody can see our body of work and see a bias in a particular direction, it would be useful to us to know we have. The test for us is MPs are brilliant at spotting biases and reading people. And for the test for us is we keep track of the MPs reaching out to us and what is their party affiliation. And ever since 2006, when we started off to now, so which is essentially 8 years of UPA and 10 years of NDA, so 2 different dispensations, the proportion of MPs reaching to us, party composition, reflects the composition of parliament, more or less. So currently the maximum number would be from BJP because they are more in parliament. Earlier, the maximum number was from Congress because they were more in parliament. So it's roughly in proportion. So that is actually our test metric on, we think we are unbiased, but are we perceived as being unbiased?
And then Madhavan, then the broader question on that, right? In the corporate world, all of us have, appraisals and KPIs and these targets that we have to hit. Who ends up sort of measuring Madhavan's performance, Chakshu's performance? Who's your appraiser in terms of performance?
The board, our board. Very simple. And in an indirect way, all our funders. So most funders are consistently giving us funds over years. If they think we are not, they will not give us money next year. I mean, that's the market test.
So,
Right.
I also had a take on that particular question, because this is a question that always plagues us as to, is the work that we're doing, is it contributing towards a better governance? Right? Now, the field of work that we have chosen to work in is, legislature, which is where laws are getting made. Now, if you had to think of it differently, let us say if you were not PRS and you had to think of it differently, then one way for a legislature's success would be, is it framing laws that are translating for better governance for the people? So in some ways, when we look at our work, we are constantly thinking that, are we contributing to the legislative process and making it better? Are we working towards making the legislative process more accessible? So if you look at it, and this is interesting. When we started in 2005, there were no publicly available data sets which were free of cost for finding out what laws are getting passed in parliament and state. Right? Now, because of the work that we have done over the years, you can actually find out the state in which you are in, what kind of law is it getting passed. Is it passing a new property law? Is it passing a new law against cheating? In fact, there have been instances where state governments call up PRS and they say that we had passed a law many years ago, we can't seem to find a copy. Will you please share a copy because your database seems to have it? Now, so for us, a measure of success is, are we making the legislative process better informed? Are we making it more transparent? And are we encouraging more and more people to engage with the process? So, the reason we want to share about the parliamentary process is so that everybody who's on this call knows that it is not difficult, knows that it is possibility to get your voices, knows that if they have an area of expertise and they notice something in the legislative sphere, possibly they could write to PRS. So for us, it's a wide spectrum of how we think about what our contribution to the legislative space is.
So just to then, Chakshu, take a cue from a question that I think both Ravi Kiran and Balwinder Singh are asking. You're saying that success for you is not just influencing the legislators of the land. Success is also the ordinary member of the public, understanding policy, writing to you guys, and influencing the legislator via PRS. Is that
not influencing? I would say understanding, and they can directly influence. I mean, so for example, if there is a draft bill which the ministry has put out, we do our analysis, put it out, we make the draft bill public. And if you have a particular point of view which may be very different from ours, you can still write into the ministry. We put out the information that standing committee is looking at this. Please write into them. They might even call you. So whatever you want to say, the idea is there should be a greater engagement of the public with the process which makes the laws which affects you.
Right. So
I'm going to leave you on a slightly lighter note.
Go on.
If you have, people joining in from Karnataka, many of them might be aware that the Karnataka legislature sits in two places. One is in the Vidhan Sabha building in Bangalore, and the other is in Belgaum.
Yeah.
So last year, we received a message on Twitter from somebody who wanted to know the session dates for the Karnataka legislature to sit in Belgaum. So we looked at the last 5 years trends of when was the Belgaum session held, and we sent it to that person. And that person replied back saying that this really helps him because he was planning his wedding. And when the legislature is in town, there are no hotels available and there are no banquet halls available. Good. So just a lighter note as to what is the work of PRS sometimes contributes towards.
No, fantastic. Now I think I'm glad now I know that if I have to travel to Belgaum, I'll check with Chakshu beforehand. But last question, a serious one at that. Internships. So Deepa Gupta wants to know, is it possible to do a law internship? Do you want to highlight the LAMP fellowship construct, Madhavan? It's a fabulous thing that you guys have built there.
So we do two programs to reach out to young people. One is a LAMP fellowship, which we started in 2010. And the idea there is, how do young people, young graduates actually, who have completed undergrad, how, if they want to get into the policy and politics field, how do they get an exposure so that eventually they get into the area? So we select about 50 every year, who each of them is trained and then assigned to an MP, works with the MP. We coach them throughout the period. We do exposure workshops for them, so that at the end of the 1 year, they have sat and in the MP's office, seen how the thing works, help prepare research notes for the MP, and learnt in the way. What happens at the end of it is, we have now about 500 alumni. About 15 to 20% of them are working directly with politics or politicians.
Wow.
In fact, I just got a message recently that one of the early LAM fellows has become the Karnataka BJP spokesperson. We also have the Congress social media person who is a former LAM fellow. So we have people actually entering. About 40% are in different policy spaces like think tanks, advocacy groups, research areas like that. And about 20% were studying in top colleges. That's the lab. Quickly, we started a second program last year. We are trying to expand that. This is aimed at kids of 11th, 12th standard. We are doing a program called Student Parliament. It's a competitive program. So that they get exposure to how the governance system in the country works. Last year we did only Delhi, because we are based in Delhi. We wanted to, as a pilot, play around with the structure. This year we did in Delhi, Bangalore, and Bombay. And the idea is to, over the next 4 to 5 years, make it an all India, fully reach everywhere. So that kids get, these are 16, 17-year-old, soon to be voters. They understand the governance system and they get engaged with that.
Fabulous. Madhavan, this is change we can believe in. Thank you so much for what you guys are doing. Folks, everybody who's watching, you can donate, we can donate. The details are on the screen. PRS needs help from Indians. They have agreed at the outset not to take foreign money, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much to everybody who's joined in this evening. And hopefully, Chakshu, hopefully, Madhavan, will be having the pleasure of your company to understand a little bit more about our parliamentary process in the months to come. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Saurabh. Thanks.
Thank you, Saurabh.
Thanks.